couple weeks ago, having a conversation with Vincenzo Mozzarella here, he told me how much he hates HA in cloud environments and how it's redundant. You want to defend yourself there, Vincent?
It sounds like I already did. I mean, realistically, we're dragging forth our old trash can concepts here, right? We're taking this layer two concept in a place where layer two doesn't really exist. It's kind of virtualized. But now you're also dragging this concept that was locked into a single data center into a world where you have hundreds of data centers in different cloud environments. So if you're building cloud agnostic tools, you need to leverage this really special and important. You may have heard of it before. It might be new to some of you. It's called DNS, and it's really powerful. There's also some really great Anycast routing stuff that the cloud can do that makes failover. It's still a change, but your application is going to be more successful than trying to drag this old stuff forward, deal with all these plugins and API calls and changes, rather than having your in-place architecture, right? So it starts to become an issue. I'm sure some of you have tried, right? You're going through.
Vinny, I don't have to set up device service clusters anymore. I don't need to have an HA pair. I can just stand up a single big IP and I'm done. Bob's your uncle. What are you telling me? What are you saying to me?
Well, a lot of customers come and say, hey, we need to cloud scale or auto scale or this or that, and their applications aren't ready for it, right? So they are hitting check boxes, or they're going down the list and saying, I need this and that because my project says I need it, not because the application can actually leverage it or benefit from it. And so because of that, there's a lot of places where, yeah, you only need a box, or you need a box in different availability zones. And maybe that box is just load balancing those decisions based on the health of the resource, right? So we use Cloud Services DNS because it's fantastic, it's cloud agnostic, and we can load balance your data center, your existing data center, any of the cloud providers at this point, because it's just an address for us, right?
So you're saying F5 Cloud Service DNS?
Absolutely.
And that covers you from a higher level, but what about via API and via NLB and the cloud failover extensions? What's the difference there? What do I need?
So those are great for bringing that forward. They're also great for leveraging some of those existing workflows in this environment, right? So there's some limitations on how the cloud environments have recreated their layer 2 behavior, right? And so some are able to replicate it via routes. Most notably, I think Azure, they call them UDRs. And then in AWS, you're swapping, the address that's associated with your device, right, with those API calls. And those things they still take time. Something has to trigger and detect that. And so a lot of the same rules apply to on-prem there, right? So now you're taking all of that and layering another tool on top of it that makes it more complex, right? Then may say using an instance that's looking at DNS for that, right? And so the TTL is very low. So that's something we've done at GTM, or the Global Traffic Manager, or Big IP DNS now forever, which is essentially our wide IPs or WIPs have a TTL of 0, essentially, right? They make the decision at that point in time of where you're going. So the first thing that always comes up is, well, about session management and long-lived sessions. Well, some of the new applications that are actually written correctly, or, obviously that's an inflammatory statement, right? Correctly, but where they're cloud native or built for this, right? They're managing their own state. They're tracking that stuff. And I've always maintained that persistence is the enemy of load balancing, right? So if you're worried about that session state arriving, then it's an old architecture, right? And so we're bringing those things forward. So F5 has the tools to play in both worlds. And so the problem that gets me the most, and the reason I feel this way, is that there's a lot of places where you could shed this stuff and not use it anymore, move on to DNS, multiple cloud endpoints, even if it's got a cloud load balancer in there, because some of that layer 4 stuff, it's fine, it's fast. Now, what I've run into testing with that is their monitoring capabilities are severely lacking, but that's where, like, our toolbox with Nginx Plus, or even just a big IP in there, has incredible monitoring capabilities, right? So we could report that status to the cloud service or whatever's doing the DNS changes.
So 2 questions for you, Vinny. Number 1, who do you think you are? And number 2, in your conversations with customers, how are you helping them adjust to the new way of life?
So, and who do I think I am? I like to tinker, get in trouble, and push the envelope where possible, right? So I'm going to look at what we're doing, and instead of continuing or saying, how do we get it done? I'm like, why are we doing this, right? And so that causes a lot of heartache for some people who are friends for status quo, but I'm not. I'm not a friend to status quo. I'm interested in how do we make this better? How do we alleviate pain? How do we reduce costs? And all these traditional things are slow, painful, and they increase cost. You need additional boxes where you didn't before. You have things sitting idle that aren't being used in a cloud environment that costs you money, right? And so when I'm talking to customers about it, I'm usually discussing with them, what is your pain point? What's your workflow today, right? Is this application actually ready to do what you're asking us to do, right? And how can I help you get there? How can I help you adopt some of these tools? And that's a lot of the big discussion now. My biggest problem with all of this is a lot of the customers I've dealt with and talked to, at least in my region, are married to the status quo. They're not just friends with it. They don't want to change anything. They don't want to learn anything. Tools are out of the past, and it's not always their fault, because a lot of places it's either a small enough organization that they have so many hats they don't have time to learn anything, or it's such a big organization they're not allowed to look at this stuff from a holistic perspective. They're only given their slice, and so both of those things cause this same scenario. And that's why, like, this whole industry has hit a brick wall, you might say, between DevOps and status quo, right? Because this is where those roads have led us, right? And we've run into the end of that, where we're now, the companies who are breaking out from that, either they have one thing in common, right? Either they're changing everything or they didn't have existing customers. Because one of the fastest ways to stop development is to launch your product and then have to deal with all the fixes and issues that come in, right? Because that's going to stop innovation and change. And so some companies have exacerbated that greatly, right? And so I would always remember large change control boards for companies who would have 12 different chiefs. And if any one of the 12 said stop, the whole train stopped, right? So it would go into organizations who hadn't changed or upgraded something in years, because every single time they got to the table, one of the 12 chiefs would stop. And so they don't break out their services accordingly, right? So in that same model of like consolidating, right, that's where things like HA were really important, because or at least the traditional HA, because you're swinging all these services from one device to another just to make sure they're always up and they can't go down. And they can't go down because everything is teetering on this. All those 12 chiefs are like, this can't fail, nothing can fail, we will, everything's over. And that's completely broken and disjointed from testing in a dev environment, testing in lower environments, having analogs to production. And so I don't need to worry about this failover event in that normal manner if my code has been tested all throughout and I can roll back. Now, as far as like the services being available, I mean, most of our web world is going towards request response, which has been the HTTP forever, right? And so that connection getting to another server is okay, even if it's another data center. A lot of this becomes a challenge of data sync for databases. So that's really the real question that comes back to is like, okay, so how do you sync all your databases if this auto scales and can go to any zone? Are you using a cloud database? No. Are you syncing this all the time? No. And so it's like, okay, well, none of this stuff helps you. It's just making your world more complicated. So.
Well, Vinnie, you've said it all. I won't say you've said too much.
What's new? That's pretty normal for me.
Yeah. Well, I would say the one thing that I do kind of like about what you're saying is that we're trying to pull people kicking and screaming into the future, right? And the good thing I think about F5 is we've got 1 foot on the legacy side and we've got 1 foot on the future. So we're straddling that and we're able to bring customers over with the technologies that will fit either one, which I think is good. I mean, it's great if you're a startup and you can start from scratch, nice green field, but majority of the customers I talk to, that they don't have that luxury. They have to find a way, to transition, and new applications is a great way to do that. But then, there's other times where you've got to do that slow, painful migration, and there's just no way around it.
Well, you got to keep the lights on, right? These are all businesses we're talking about. We're here to make money, right? So that's number one. And that's why availability is so important, because if the service is down, we make our money in the service, we're not making money. So then none of this matters. We're not making money. So that's why it's so critical that we design these things in redundant manner, but it doesn't have to be a standby redundant manner. And that worked. That was great for a long time, but it really doesn't fit in this world. We don't really want to sync sessions to that level across, because the ways the technologies are evolving, it's not necessary anymore, right? And like the point about greenfield versus existing customers is, like, when you have existing customers, you have to keep the lights on, right? So greenfield doesn't have that problem. They change constantly, iterate, and then they become encumbered eventually over time. And you'll watch this happen again and again as companies will go out and launch and then start to slow down that development cycle. And so that's just part of it, right? It's part of that balance between stability and features.